This is the final program in our fall series, Talks in the Othmer. This is the Othmer reading room of the Center for Brooklyn History. It's been an amazing series and a great space to have, authentic conversations in. It's very special. So tonight's kind of special because it's the last one in the series, as I've said. And on Monday, this building shuts down for about 6 months, something, for a renovation to our lower level in order to make it an even better place to have public programs like this one, and reopens bigger and better in the spring of 2023 with hopefully pandemic behind us, and a lot of I think new things that bring together the former Brooklyn Historical Society and its identity and vibe, and the Brooklyn Public Library and its identity and vibe. So keep your eyes open for that. I want to thank NYU Brooklyn-based 370J Project, who are our partners, and especially Michael Bernard, who's here tonight, for helping make this series happen. All of these programs have been recorded and are posted on our YouTube channel. And if it wasn't for their support, we would not have the funds to do that, and a lot of other things. So thank you so much. Thank you. So tonight we welcome two people who have written books about their personal journeys and the legacy of Blackness, which is, as you know, the title of the program, as it plays out in family, race, identity. Nabil Ayers' new book is titled My Life in the Sunshine, Searching for My Father and Discovering My Family. And for him, I'll out the fact that tonight he comes full circle, because he wrote, apparently, this book, much of this book, in this very room. And he reached out to me and said, I have a cool idea. And I thought it was a really cool way to end this series. And as a side message, is to tell everybody in the whole world that this room is not a place just for scholars and researchers and historians who, are digging deeply into the boxes. It's really for anybody and everybody. And when we reopen, come and write your memoir here. Come and research something that strikes your fancy. This is that kind of space. So after their talk, Rebecca Carroll, by the way, is here, and she's leading this conversation. And her memoir is titled Surviving the White Gaze. So there's a lot of dots to connect between these two speakers. After their talk, there will be books and signing and gathering downstairs. I want to thank my colleague who's downstairs right now, librarian Lee Hurwitz, for curating a selection of related reading that you can check out, and literally check out of the library. And if you don't have a library card, you can get one tonight. So check out her books and check out her books. So I'm going to just tell you a few things just briefly about both of our participants tonight, and then turn it over to them. But again, I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. So Nabil Ayers is the president of Beggars Group USA, where he has released albums by many GRAMMY Award-winning artists. He's written about music and race for the New York Times, NPR, Rolling Stone, and GQ, and many other publications. And Rebecca Carroll is a writer, cultural critic, and host of the podcast Come Through with Rebecca Carroll, 15 Essential Conversations About Race in a Pivotal Year for America. Formerly the cultural critic at WNYC and a critic at large for the Los Angeles Times, she is currently an editor at large for the Meteor, and Surviving the White Gaze, her memoir, has been optioned by MGM Studios and Killer Films, with Rebecca attached to write and executive produce. So please help me welcome both of them to come up, and thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So nice to see everybody. Is this mic on?
Absolutely. Okay. Cool. Thanks for coming out, everybody. It's really lovely to see you. And this is such a joy. I loved Nabil's book, and as I was reading it, it was just wild. I don't know how many of you all have read both of our books, but there's so much interesting overlap, and as Marcia said, dots to connect. But what I wanted to start with is what really struck me while reading, and then when I finished, is how kind of gendered the mixed race experience is, which is that you found like a cool pair of glasses and joined a band and you were good to go, right? Meanwhile, I like contorted myself for years to try to present an aesthetic that would meet the standard of American beauty, which for women is white, right? It was hair, it was body, it was clothes, it was hips, it was, you know, and I wondered if you were cognizant of that at all during your sort of coming of age years or in retrospect.
Wow, that's a good question. And by the way, we've never spoken before.
Yeah, this
we
is our first
deliberately decided not to. We were DMing and said, let's just have the first conversation be this. So there's been no practice. I definitely had no idea that question was coming. And it's a really good one. I mean, it might not have been as easy as getting a pair of glasses and playing drums, but I never thought about it in a gendered way. And even reading your book and writing my book, that didn't really cross my mind. I wonder how much easier it was for me as a man.
So I don't even think it's a matter of easier, really. I just think that the exploration and the kind of the way in which we're perceived, you know, if you are a light-skinned black woman, we have a little bit of an in, right? Like you read that part in my book where in high school where I was like, oh, Lisa Bonet.
Right,
okay,
right,
I can
right.
go with that.
Right.
I can go that look, and that brings me a little bit closer to the standard of beauty, of white beauty,
Right.
and still not quite there. Whereas I think for men and boys, it just feels different. So I just wanted to know if it felt different in terms of the way people were looking at you.
I mean, it's hard to say because I've talked about this a lot, but the first 10 years of my life, and I mean, our stories are similar, but they're also so different in so many ways.
Different,
My
yeah.
first 10 years are in these really open, accepting places with tons of biracial kids, tons of kids of different races, tons of kids with single parents, nobody with money. So I was really a pretty normal kid for those 10 years. Like it wasn't
I love
it wasn't
that's
like,
what we
oh,
think
I'm
of as
kind of
normal.
strange. Yeah, but that's what was so cool about it. So I just didn't really think about it then. I was just normal. When I moved to Salt Lake City when I was 10, I was definitely not normal for the first time, and that's probably when I started to think like, oh, weird, I look different, and I did the same thing you did. I got polo shirts and Izod shirts, and like we literally named the same brands in our books, but I mean, I never thought about my weight or my hips or the things that you write about, my body. That stuff is intense. And
Yeah.
that never occurred to me.
You write at some point, you didn't need to have friends or kids to be friends with you who had afros, but for kids to not define you by your afro.
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting because what, either in retrospect or then, would it have meant to be defined by your afro?
Yeah, I think that was me being 10 and suddenly for the first time in my life having kids come up to me and ask to touch my afro or ask why I had a weird name or all these things that weren't racist necessarily, but
How do you think that's not racist?
well, I mean, they weren't calling me names. It was a different level of racism, maybe. But it was things that made me uncomfortable for the first time and made me realize I'm different, but also made me quickly pivot to, but how can I not be different? What are the things I can do to feel like I felt when I was in Amherst? I can have kids over after school and play them records. I can play drums. We can watch MTV. I can talk about New York pizza and all these things I know that they don't know, and that's how I can fit in. And I can buy the same clothes. So instead of sort of maybe embracing what was different, I just tried to like go down the track of what would allow me to fit in.
Yes, and I do want to say, very much to your mother's credit, that you were surrounded by other mixed race and biracial children, which, you know, my experience was literally from day one. Everybody around the dinner table was white. Everybody in my classroom was white. And in part, early on, like that was okay. It was even kind of cool because I was just this very outgoing kid. I was really into dancing and writing and chatting, and I was so charming and so on and so forth. And so when I left that kind of bubble, I didn't have any sense of mixed race black folks being normal.
Right.
And so I think that is actually an enormous difference.
Yeah.
And really critically important in my conversations with white adoptive parents of black and brown kids. But the other thing that struck me just in what you were saying is like they weren't racist, but there's another point where you write in the book, like, even though I hadn't experienced that much racism, I couldn't avoid it. And I was like, did you really know what that much racism meant?
Right. I mean, it's all on a scale, right?
Well, I don't know if it's a scale so much as it's we didn't have the language
right.
to contextualize. Mm-hmm. Like you said, you knew something felt weird.
Right, and I knew how much worse it could be. So I'm sure that's what made me think, oh, this isn't that bad. Because they could be calling me names, or they could be really excluding me, or they could be doing all the things I see on TV or that I hear about, and that's not happening. They're just asking questions. So it's not
Right.
racist. That's what I thought was happening.
So Nabil had a really good idea in the room. That, and as we said earlier, there's a lot of overlap and dots to connect. So he's going to read from a section in his book, and then I'm going to read in a corresponding section.
So this is, where are we? About a third of the way in. I'm in high school in Salt Lake City. And I think that's enough context. East High School had several formal dances each year. From homecoming in the fall to senior prom in the spring, every event was open to the full student body, regardless of grade. I didn't have a girlfriend, but that didn't matter. Large groups of friends went together, using the occasion as an excuse to get some money from our parents, rent a downtown hotel suite, and fill it with alcohol bought by someone's older brother. I'm laughing because my mother's here. Sorry. We'd attend the dance itself only for a few minutes, long enough to get an official photo taken and find out where others would be partying after. I always felt accepted and included, part of the community that was my school. But deep down, I sometimes wondered where or when that feeling might change, where a line might exist. Dating someone's white teenage daughter, to me, was an obvious potential place for that line to appear. Anytime a girl said yes to going out with me, I felt relieved. But then I'd start to think, did she tell her parents who she's going to prom with? What questions did they ask when she said my name? How many times did she have to repeat it? And was there a conversation after that? The anxiety continued up through the night of the dances. Each time I walked up to my date's home in my slightly too large suit, topped with a nervous brace-filled grin, I wondered what questions her parents would ask me. What does your father do for a living? What church do you attend? Where are you from? I pictured their faces turning from smiles to friendly confusion as they asked their daughter to meet them in the kitchen for a moment. I'd imagine the mother emerging to say, "Julie is suddenly not feeling well. I'm so sorry." These thoughts went through my head every time, and every time I was proved wrong. Not once did I feel that any parent was a little bit skeptical. Not once did anyone's sibling blurt out, "He's black." Not once did a parent ever mispronounce my name or give me anything less than a firm handshake and a pat on the shoulder. While I was experiencing some racial microaggressions in high school, the situation that worried me the most, dating, proved to be far less complicated. But no matter how many of my dates went without incident, I wasted a significant amount of energy preparing for the one that wouldn't. That's a good segue.
I am in high school in rural New Hampshire. I have very close friends in a clique that matters. This is a conversation with my friend Nate and I. "Nate, come on, the prom is so stupid anyway," I said, sipping from a can of Diet Pepsi at a table in the library. We were hanging out after school before his soccer practice started. "Dude, let's just go for the hell of it. Who cares?" "Sure, why not?" Nate said, shrugging his shoulders. Nate and I had remained good friends since middle school when I'd been his confidant and shoulder to cry on through numerous breakups with his girlfriend, Ella, who had left to spend a year abroad. Now Nate had just broken up with another girlfriend, Ginny, a few weeks before the sophomore prom, which, although it was widely considered pretty corny, A lot of couples still attended and used it as an excuse to make out all night. We can dress up. It'll be fun, I said. And we can leave early if we get bored. After trying desperately to assimilate with the preppy crowd during middle school, saving babysitting money to buy pink and green Izod polo shirts, borrowing LL Bean sweaters from friends, and begging Catherine and Tess, these are people you don't need to know about, to buy me Nike sneakers, I'd gone in the complete opposite direction, fashion-wise in high school, and now shopped almost exclusively at thrift shops. I modeled myself after Lisa Bonet's character Denise from The Cosby Show, wearing oversized men's blazers, harem pants, scarves, and strips of lace tied around my head, button-up shirts and large beaded brooches pinned at the neck. Recently, I'd found a pair of men's black tuxedo tails and short red strapless dress at a shop that had clearly just received a big drop from a cocktail party going crowd. What better excuse to wear these two fancy pieces than the prom, I thought. Our inner circle of friends was small, so people found out pretty quickly that Nate and I had decided to go to the prom together. The next day, when I walked into school, I was immediately besieged by concerned friends. Had I heard? They asked. Heard what? Nate's father forbid him to take you to the prom, my friend Mark said. Forbid him? I thought. It's the prom. Whose parents forbid their child from going to the prom? What? Why? That I didn't immediately connect the dots and answer my own question is evidence that I was either delusional or hopeful regarding my viability and worth among my white peers, especially since Nate's father, Mr. James, was my U.S. history teacher and had not so subtly indicated a few weeks prior that I was dumb because I'm black. He said if Nate goes with you, he won't allow any pictures to be taken because who wants to look back and see that you took a black girl to the prom? Let me see. On the night of the prom, Nate stood admiring himself in front of the floor-length mirror in my bedroom. The vintage tuxedo tails fit him to a T. I joined him in the reflection, standing at his side, my bare brown collarbones and rounded shoulders rising up out from under the tight, bright red taffeta of my dress that fell just to the top of my knees. Nate grabbed his lapels, grinning like a showman, and I looped my arm inside the crux of his, smiling too. Nate had beautiful clear eyes and garnet-colored lips. He'd grown taller since middle school and gone from boyish-looking to handsome. We looked amazing. Okay, let's go, Nate said, patting down his chest and the back pockets of his jeans for what I presumed to be his car keys. Didn't you just have them? I said. I'm not looking for my keys. I'm looking for my wallet, he said, visibly annoyed. Shit, I think I left it at home. Is it okay if we stop at my house real quick on the way? I don't think Nate realized it until we pulled into his driveway when he turned off the engine, looked over at me in the passenger seat, and then turned the engine back on. I'll just leave the car running so you can stay warm, he said awkwardly, as if he weren't hiding me from his father. I'll just be a minute, I promise. I watched him walk up the driveway to his house, the headlights exposing him as fully as I was hidden inside the dark car, set against the pitch-black night with the heat on. Part of me wanted to jump out of the car and march up behind Nate, blast through the door, and just stand in front of Mr. James. But the other, more familiar part of me sat isolated and stuck inside my own chaotic unease about my identity. That's the gendered part.
Right.
Right?
I guess, I mean, what's interesting, well, a lot of it's interesting, but I was constantly in fear of that happening, always thinking about it, but it didn't happen. You were not even close to thinking about
what
it.
the hell is this?
Yeah,
What are
you
talking
still
about?
didn't know
It's
what
the
was
prom.
happening, even when your friends were telling you this is happening.
Right, and that is so interesting. Why do you think that you were anticipating it? I mean, what did you see, or did your mom say this might happen?
I don't think so. I think it's just sort of cautious neuroses of being a kid who'd moved to Salt Lake City and knew he was different and was like, I just need to always be kind of careful and be thinking about it, thinking about where I am.
And so, you know, the way that your life and your career evolved, you know, you have had a great deal of self-awareness, confidence, going toward the things that you love. Do you feel like there was a point where you shed that sort of anticipation and that kind of, I'm not going to enter a room and anticipate or expect people to see me as different?
No, I think it's still there. And I don't think that ever goes away. I just, I'm in New York. I feel more comfortable here, obviously, than I did in Salt Lake City when I was 14. But it's still always kind of there in the back of my head.
I think it's...
Isn't it for you? I mean, or if not, no.
Well, tell me what you think I'm asking you.
If I've gotten rid of that worry.
So I think it's very much less worry for me, as it is a kind of sort of an ease, a sense of ease with the discomfort. We meet folks throughout our lives who have impact and say things that we keep. And the activist Julian Bond once said to me when I asked him, how do you keep doing this? How do you keep walking in this terrain of trying to change the way people think about race and blackness? And he said, you just find an ease in the walking forward. And so I feel like that's what happened for me with my identity, but it certainly took a long time. And I think anticipatory worry is different from walking into a room and fighting each other. Because that happens. Right. Every room you walk in, you're like, where are we at? And we have that for each other. But I didn't really know how to do that when I was younger.
Well, because neither of us grew up around it.
Right. Although, again, and I do think it's really important that, you had peers.
I had
early
peers,
on.
but in such a weird, unique way, because there weren't the black kids or the biracial
Right.
kids there weren't groups. It was just this crazy mix, and so there was no one was the same in a good way. Like there weren't.
And so was there a point where that really came to bear, which was like, that was helpful in terms of having other folks of color, but it didn't put me over. It didn't quite speak to this strange feeling I'm having in this particular moment.
It certainly didn't help me define a racial identity, which I, at
Right.
50,
Okay,
still have
yes.
not done and wrote 320 pages about. And I think that's largely due to never having to assimilate, never having to choose a group with which to be part of.
I'm so glad you said that, because I finished this book and I closed the book and I thought, does he think of himself as black? Do you?
I mean, I already answered it by doing that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yes, but not yes.
Yeah.
Yes?
That's wild.
Yeah.
When we were going back and forth, Marsha and I were going back and forth about the title, because I'm a little bit extra. I like to be involved in those things. But I was like, can we not center mixedness? Like, can we make it about blackness? Because for me, it was very much the torture, the contortion, all of those things that I had. My formative years centered whiteness, and as I tried to find myself, I felt like I was being completely decentered in a way that I couldn't understand. And it was such a relief to be able to just be like, you know what? I don't need y'all's whiteness at all. Right. I don't need it. And even now, my partner is white, and we're raising our son who black identifies, very clearly black identifies, and we had a funny experience once when a white couple asked my husband pointedly, but don't you feel like you're sort of robbing him of his whiteness? And my husband, bless his heart, a sociology professor, said, what would that be? What would that look like? What is whiteness? Like, I mean, it'd be one thing if we were Irish or Italian or had some kind of amazing, historic cultural context there, but just the idea that whiteness is the default and that there would be something to rob our son of. But I think too, there's a loyalty issue, perhaps. I don't know if you feel that.
I don't, it doesn't feel like loyalty to me. I mean, to your point, I don't know if you know James Spooner, who started Afropunk and wrote an incredible book that came out this year, and we've done a few events together, and we were talking after one of them, and he's white mother, black father, very similar situation, and he definitely identifies as black, started Afropunk. And we were talking about prison somehow, as I think men often do in conversations, and I was like, yeah, of course I have the same fear of going to prison. I have an additional fear of what happens in the yard, and all the different races are there, and where I would go. And James just goes, black, you're black.
Obviously. Yeah.
Right, but that's not, I don't know if in the prison would they accept me.
Really?
I mean, I don't know. I hope I never find out.
Well, no, I hope you never find out either. I hope you never find out either. I mean, there was also something that you wrote about how when you lived, I think it was Amherst, you and your mom heard complaints about missing fathers, missing black fathers, but that it didn't concern you because your father wasn't missing. Right. But I wondered how you distinguish between missing and absent.
I think missing in that sense is he left us. There was a divorce. He was here, now he's not here. Some kind of shift, and there was something that existed, and now there's not. But that was never the case. The quick background is my mother said to my father, I want to have your child. You don't have to be part of our lives. That's what happened. I've always known that story. So it was always framed to me as positive. This is, your father did this great thing. He brought us you. I mean, I'm sort of paraphrasing, but that's what I felt like I was being told. That was the narrative, not this deadbeat guy's not around, he doesn't send us money. It was zero of that. I've never once heard anything like that.
I mean, I asked that particularly because a girlfriend, very close girlfriend of mine, who is chosen family to me, Corinne, in the book, has said to me a couple of times, but the first time she said it, it hit so hard. She said, Rebecca, something is missing. And she meant Blackness and my father, my birth father. Something.
How old were you
missing.
when this happened?
When she said that to me the first time, I mean, it could have been 10 years ago. It was pretty recent. But she had never said it in that way because she and her son is a year older than mine, and we're sort of raising them as cousin brothers, and we travel together a bunch. And the reason that they're so important to me is because something is missing. So I think it's interesting that you distinguish between, I think it's okay to miss, though, right? You missed your father?
I don't think I did, not as a kid, no. I think I missed him as an adult once I started to want and need things from him. But as a kid, I really don't think I did.
So on this question of racial ambiguity, if we can call it that, for you, perhaps part of what you were missing was him giving you that blackness, no?
I don't know. There's no way to know what the other situation would have looked like to be able to answer that. I don't know. I mean, sure, he's my black father, so I assume that I'd be drastically different if I'd spent a lot of time with him and met his family and learned things from him. So probably, but was it missing? Is it something that I needed? I don't know.
And so what would you say to James, or what have you said to James Spooner or any other number of black friends that you have? Why don't you identify as black?
The sort of textbook answer, but which is true, but I've answered it so many times now that it feels like I'm just reading it or doing an interview, which I sort of am, is that it's those first 10 years when it didn't matter. Those were such important years when people establish identity, and my identity was, we're all just this rainbow of kids in Amherst.
With all due respect.
Please.
It never doesn't matter. And so it's not that somebody, your mother or any of the adults in your life were hiding that fact from you, but surely you have revisited in your mind the ways in which it had to have mattered during that rainbow time.
And to be fair, during the rainbow years, as we're now calling them, I mean, there were Puerto Rican kids whose parents were Puerto Rican and cooked Puerto Rican meals and very much, played Puerto Rican music. Like, they were part of that culture. Like, that certainly existed. I don't mean nobody had any culture, or any history, or any racial sense of belonging. I just mean it was such a mix that nothing was dominant, and you didn't have to talk about it a lot, or you didn't get to talk about it a lot.
Right. Well, of course, that's different.
Yeah.
I mean, it
But
mattering.
but my experience
Yeah.
was that it didn't matter because it was all just cool, and I could hang out with all of them, and that's what I mean by it didn't matter.
So in some ways, not to be, a linguistic nerd, but in some ways it mattered tremendously.
Right. Maybe.
Right. Talk a little bit about the way that music, your discovery of music, became so central, both as a way to connect to your father, but also to individuate for yourself.
I mean, so many people have asked about, talk about when you first discovered music or what it first meant to you, and I can't because that time doesn't exist. It's like air or food. It's literally always been there. My mother's a dancer, not a musician, but lots of music around, so many records, so many concerts, so many musician friends. My uncle, who's my father figure, is a jazz saxophone player. I would seriously sit around as a toddler and play with Legos, and he would practice for 6 hours. Then we'd play music together, and he bought me a drum set when I was 2. So it's all just it goes back as far as I do. There's never not been music. So there's not even a sort of point of discovery for me. It's more just that was something that I was always super, super obsessed with, super into, listening, playing, watching every version of it. And as a kid, I didn't think too deeply about my connection to my father, but I, of course, knew who he was. I knew I would see his records in the store. We saw him play sometimes. My mother would take me to see him play live. And there was this assumption in me, I always wanted to be in a band. And there was definitely this thing in me that even though I didn't know him, I never saw him or rarely talked to him, I thought, well, I think I can do that because he's doing that. That definitely existed. And that's a really important, even though it's small, it was a huge piece that and it didn't really, I don't think my thought process went much further than that, and I might have only gotten the DNA from him, whereas my mother and my uncle gave me the encouragement and the instruments and the time and the concerts and the records and all those things, which allowed me to follow that. But I think knowing that little spark was there, that just gave me the confidence, obviously it's there. I just need to keep doing all these things, and I'll end up like him. I think that was the connection as a kid.
So, yes, and it was more, what I was thinking more was the way that you really embraced it, and it really became, as you said, it was like air and food and whatnot, but then, in your teen and college years, you just really went fully forward into it, and it became yours. Right. But also, I would say about DNA, DNA is no small thing. And especially in the context of Blackness, which is to say, in my book, there were very specific moments when the ancestors. Did I turn that off, or did the battery die? I think I don't know what happened. But there were very specific moments when it felt to me like the ancestors were sending somebody to me to remind me of who I was. Easy reader on Electric Company, my first black dance teacher, the break dancers who I wanted in 6th grade so desperately to connect with. And so I feel, so when I say it about music and making your own, but also a way in which you were connected to your father, I think it perhaps goes even further than just your father, right?
Yeah, I know what you mean now. Those moments for me, some of which are in the book, were being a teenager in Salt Lake City, being super into white alt rock, basically, and seeing every show and loving it, and then seeing a Living Color show and a Fishbone show when I was 15, 16, and realizing, because I was super into rock music, MTV, the radio, all of that was so white, and those were the bands I loved, whatever, Van Halen, all these new wave bands. wasn't very into hip hop. So I mean, I would really listen to a lot of white music, and then I saw these two black rock bands, and that was definitely the like more than the DNA thing. Like, oh, I can do that because my father's doing it. This was really like these people are they're actually doing exactly what I want to do. They're playing the kind of music I want to play. They're 5 to 10 years older than me, and this is happening. This is possible. That was huge.
So you do actually identify as black.
We can do a poll if you want to. You've decided?
No. I mean, it's not that I've decided. It is that we see each other. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
we
definitely.
see each other.
Yes.
And that is what the legacy is. We find each other in the room. The ancestors send us people who, and that was a moment.
Yeah,
that was a moment where you were like, okay, it doesn't have to be just be
Someone's
my father.
talking to me right now.
Someone is
Definitely
talking
what that
to me.
felt like. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And at the Jane's Addiction concert, it did not feel like that.
Right.
It felt like someone, I love this, but I can't have this conversation.
And so, obviously for different reasons, but growing up in an all-white environment, it was all that white stuff. It was a little less chic. It was a little more like Aerosmith and like those kinds of bands, Boston, but it also. In retrospect, it was sort of, I don't know, I listen to an 80s station when I go grocery shopping in the car because there's a nostalgia factor to it.
My wife and
but
I do
I
that,
also
yeah.
am completely ashamed. Like when my kid's in the car, we listen to 97.1, we listen to the hip-hop station, of course. But I don't know, there's something about music that just, whatever it is, whatever you...
Are you ashamed because, and I'm assuming this 80s music is white, but maybe I'm wrong. But what are you ashamed because it's cheesy or because
Both.
it's, yeah.
It's cheesy, although I much more embrace the cheesiness. I don't mind embracing the cheesiness so much. But yeah, that it's super white. Yeah. But you were quite clear on what music was, what the quality of music was, right? Like, I mean, arguably that whole era of grunge and which never appealed to me, but arguably
Yeah.
very, very good, evidently.
But I mean, evidently, but it's all subjective. I mean, there are plenty of people who think that's trash and that that's just Soundgarden. That's like that's Aerosmith, a step or two ahead, but it's the same thing. Boston, I think they listen to those bands. So I don't know if it's good. Good.
Yeah.
I thought it was good. I still do.
What has your experience been like since the book came out with black folks and young black men, particularly?
It's been really interesting because it came out in June, which is a while ago now. So in the beginning, the events that I did were, my friends or sort of friends of friends. And as it's gone on, I see more people that I don't know, and especially did things in like Champaign, Illinois, and Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And cities where I don't know a lot of people, and there's people coming who I don't know. There'll be 20, 30 people who I've never met at a thing, and there's definitely more black people than I expect at these events. And to me, it's hard because it's not like I'm going back to the same city 3 times and seeing different crowds, but it feels like there are slowly more and more black people getting into the book and into the story, and that's really interesting for me. And the best question that a young black man asked recently in North Carolina was, "What's your salary?" Which is a really good question. It was the first question. I know. Pretty blunt, right? Yeah. No, I was, of course, the host, who's my friend John Darnielle, who's a musician who a lot of people in this room know, he just kind of turned it into this like, well, when I started playing in bands, I thought $1,000 was a lot of money, and sort of talked about music and money. Yeah.
What you make as a musician?
I'm not sure. We didn't really ask him what he meant. We just kind of talked around it.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. And so, has anybody in these rooms and during this tour been as, particularly black folks, been as direct as I have in terms of like, so why don't you? Do you feel, I mean, beyond the textbook answer? Right. I mean, this book, and I know, and as a person who has just written a memoir, I mean, it changes you. The excavation of it, the brutal honesty of it, the painstaking kind of, actual writing of it, it changes you.
And the continuous talking about it and still hearing new questions and having new conversations and all of that, where when the book came out, I was like, it's out. I'll just talk about it. It'll be really fun. And some of these conversations have been really intense, but I keep doing it. I love it. And it's all, to me, it didn't actually end when it came out. In a way, it started. So much has happened. I'm still thinking so much more and meeting more people. So it's all, I don't know, it's all part of the journey.
I was struck, and I DM'd this to you, just how natural a storyteller you are and writer that you are. Is there more? Are there more books coming?
I don't know. I mean, I was just saying in the room, I knew what this was the whole time. It took me 3.5, 4 years, and it was hard, and it was a lot of work, and a lot of going back and everything, but I always knew where I was trying to get, and I'm happy to say I got there, and I'm really happy with it. Now, I mean, this is about my whole life. So now I'm trying to think of what to do next, and even the fact that I have to think about that feels challenging to me. I mean, I have lots of ideas. None of them are jumping out as the one, whereas this was just, this is it. It's easy. It's sort of about me and my relationship with my father and music and all these things. But that's also part of this process for me. I definitely want to write another book, and doing this and talking and thinking and meeting more people and meeting more family and all of this stuff is not necessarily, doesn't mean, cool, now I can write the sequel, I have enough info. It just means I'm still learning about myself and exploring, and we'll see where it goes.
I love that. It's a great place to pause and invite you all to ask questions. I am perfectly delighted to call on you. Here's one over here. That one doesn't work, I don't think. So we can hear.
Yeah, I feel like they need the mic, and I don't. I was gonna bring it back.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Hello. This has been really wonderful and interesting, so thank you for doing this. As someone who I guess is relatively young, it's really fascinating to hear you guys reflect on high school, and I don't want to age anyone. I don't know either of your ages. But I was wondering what that's like to think about now. And just, I think culturally it's so interesting that high school is universally considered such a formative time, especially in relation to cultural, racial, gender, so on and so forth, identity. And I was hoping both of you could talk about that.
I mean, what's fun for me is that so much of these cover the exact same time period, and there are outfits and like really specific cultural references that it's just so weird that we're both experiencing. So in a way, I feel much less in the spotlight right now. I feel like we have like so much in common. But I'm trying to think of how to answer the question. I mean, for me, high school was a huge, huge thing. All of it goes back to music. The easiest way to access it when it was in this room where I wrote a lot of it was to sit here with headphones and play whatever, the Living Colour album, the Metallica album, and to start writing about the prom and writing about these things. And to really realize that those were kind of the years when the most happened and the most shifts for me happened, and when I kind of, I think, not necessarily figured out who I was, but made the biggest progression of that than any other time, probably. I don't know if that really answers the question, but let's hear your answer.
High school was all strategy for me. It was all about getting the hell out of this tiny-ass rural white town. And so what that meant was I had to sell my soul a little bit and be in these, and place a lot of stock in this kind of clique culture. My parents' biological children, my brother and sister, older brother and sister, there was the front hall and the back hall at our high school. They were in the back hall. And I didn't speak to them during the daytime. I was in the front hall. And that was strategy. So, and that also meant that I had to take these blows, which, again, as we started with, I was like, wait, what are you talking about? So writing about it was in many ways gratifying and I waited my ass off to write this book. Like, I really did, because there's a lot in here, and I also needed to have the emotional fortitude to be as completely honest as I could be. But in reflection, you know, I feel like I don't know if proud is the right word, because it was so devastating the whole time. But I tip my hat to high school Rebecca.
Hi. Just wanted to thank you both for your vulnerability and sharing your stories. My question is personal, but this has all been very personal. As someone who is going to be a white mother to black children, I'm wondering if, or what the best thing is that I can do for my kids. Like, I feel like, is it that I ensure that they have a strong black community of other black children to be around? Is that the best thing I could do for them? Like, yeah, that's my question.
Okay, so first, I appreciate your asking the question. That you're asking the question while knowing that you are about to do it is slightly problematic, only because it, to me, indicates that you don't have black people in your life already. Is that correct? Okay. So the most important thing is to have a community of black folks already intact, right? Not to try to find or seek out black community or black value or black art or black culture in post. And that is the thing that I find the most with adoption. I don't know if you're having natural or adopting or however you're becoming a white mother to black children, what I come across the most is that it's, well, I keep trying to make friends with black people and they don't want to be friends with me. You want to know why they don't want to be friends with you? Yeah, because you just decided that black people matter, right? So I would say it's a matter of decentering whiteness. It is a matter of thinking all the time about what it feels like for your black children to be parented by a white person and the way in which you can service each other, right? It's not just a poster. It's not just one book. It is an immersion.
I mean, I have a much less intense answer than that. Everything you said makes tons of sense. I mean, I didn't have a lot of black people around, even in those, the sort of, whatever, the rainbow years. It was, again, just a mix of people. But one thing that I do think was important for me was there are tons of black records by black musicians, movies, film, books, art, all of that to me was never presented as, and this is a black artist who can also play music. It was all just music. It was all just film. It was all just whatever. And so it all had equal weight, and there was enough of it that it was just, to me, I just automatically knew that it was just as important or better or whatever, and that was, I think, an important part for me.
That's that immersion part.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So do we have another? Yeah, great.
I'd like you both to reflect how much President Obama was an influence on your lives, him being biracial.
I mean, I moved to Brooklyn from Seattle, which is super white, in 2008, in like August, September 2008, and Obama was elected in November. I write about this in the book, but I lived in Fort Greene, and I remember walking down the street. I mean, I was, of course, thrilled, but I remember walking down the street the day he got elected and just getting all the head nods from black people and getting these looks, and especially for someone who doesn't always get that, just thinking like, wow, this is a real thing. And also not even so much personally, but for me, it also just meant like, I mean, I wish it were all true, but the world is going to be a better place. Everything's changing, and this is just a marker of that change, but it's not about him or me or the fact that we're even alike. It's just that things are getting better. That's what it meant for me at the time.
Well, I don't don't know where to start. It's so multifaceted. My relationship with with the microphone. Yeah. No, with Barack Obama. Years ago, I actually dated a good friend of his who would talk about his friend Barry, who he played basketball with. And then all these years later, it was just sort of strange. But also, what I admire and what I relate to and what I trust about Barack Obama is that he also did this journey that we did. He also really went into that excavative mode and searched and wrote and went to painstaking levels to try to figure it out. And then he married a black ass woman because that is what made sense for him. And then they created this gorgeous family that gave us all something to see. That I think that they always knew exactly what they wanted to be and how they were going to be it. And just in terms of integrity, cultural integrity, intellectual integrity, I continue to really admire and feel affected by that.
Hello, hello. I have two questions. One, this is fascinating. You know, I've always been interested in the mixed experience because I think on the white side, it's a completely different reality than on the black side. And for better or for worse, you have to pick the greatness on either end. One of the questions that I have is, there was like an engagement and interaction where blackness seems to be very defined with you, but then there was this conversation of, well, what is whiteness and what am I being stripped of? So based on you guys' experiences, could you speak towards maybe the absence of a defined whiteness in America? That I think you even had to delineate of, is it Italian, is it Irish? And then the over-definition of what blackness means, because now we deal with a flat blackness, because we can easily define it, and most of the times it's defined on negative tropes. So how do you guys navigate through, I guess, selecting the greatness from either side and not allowing the flatness to exist on both of them?
I tend to sometimes be kind of a sarcastic asshole to do that. That's my move, like that movie, all the Jordan Peele movies, but Nope, I just watched on a flight the other day, and I was thinking about it. I was thinking about how people would describe that as, what, it's like a black horror movie, right? It's Jordan Peele, he makes black movies. And a Stephen King movie, whatever, Cujo, that's a movie, or it's a horror movie. That's what you're talking about. It's inherent. We know it doesn't need to be described as a white movie. So I will sometimes be the person that's like, oh yeah, that's Stephen King. He makes white horror films, right? And say things like that just so that people will be like, yeah, why are you saying that? And then you're in the conversation. And it's just fun to point out that that's my weird way of addressing it sometimes. And you?
I don't see greatness in whiteness. I don't. And I don't equivalate. Is that the right word? Equate. I don't equate the greatness of blackness with the greatness of whiteness. I think decentering whiteness is an act of revolution. I think that blackness, where it is easy and clear and salient and trenchant for me, is that we have created everything that is viable, that is has a history, that is tied to art, that is tied to music, that is tied to fashion, that is tied to style. It all started with blackness. And so I don't have any kind of, I'm not unclear about what I choose or why I choose it. And I think that the whiteness, which to Nabil's point, is the default. That doesn't mean it's culturally significant. It doesn't mean that it has any kind of roots in greatness. It just means that it's default. And that's because some people who colonized the country decided that that would be the default. So I am very cognizant and very clear on decentering whiteness and why that is not something that I identify with. Any other questions? Oh, there's one over here.
Hi, again, thank you for doing the talk. It's been really interesting to hear you guys talk a bit more about your experiences. Let me take off this mask. I thought it was really interesting how you kind of really went in a bit deeper about, like, I guess the ambiguity of whether or not you identify as Black, and kind of touched on that. And I guess that's kind of, like, I'd love to hear you guys expand a bit more maybe on how you come around. I guess to me it seems very much like in a predominantly white culture, in that context, a mixed person can easily be seen as Black. And so that's kind of like an easy identity to take. Or, well, not easy, I don't want to be reductive. But that in the context of a group of like Black people, that then again, it's not so simple as like, it's all the same. So I guess if that makes sense, if you guys could just expand on how you come around to, like, yeah, your identity as Black people and how it comes from, I guess how you come around to it from yourself as opposed to just what other people put upon you. Because to me it seems very much like without the context of other people looking at you, really none of these terms have any meaning. So yeah, I guess that's.
Yeah, I can talk more about, I mean, I just thought about this, but when you're asking about my father missing and having a Black person around, a Black role model, all that stuff, what is interesting and what came up later in the book and later in my life is when I did a DNA test 5-6 years ago, not that long ago, a cousin got in touch with me who's Black, who said, I'm your third cousin, I'm going to send you this Ayers family tree that you might want to see. And it's this fascinating document. It goes back to one enslaved man in Alabama, Isaac Ayers, in 1824. It has a picture of everybody. It has a paragraph or two about all these people, these generations. This is all stuff I never knew about, even when I met my father 15 years ago and asked him for some sort of family info. He didn't or couldn't give me any of that, but it was all suddenly sitting in front of me, and it was really intense. And that was definitely the moment that I should have thought of a minute ago, where I thought, like, oh, I am Black. Definitely. Looking at these people, same last name, even though I changed my name, and obviously someone changed their name, still there's something about all of that.
You heard it here first. You heard it here first.
Right. So that was a pretty heavy moment that at least made me think a lot more about it and really feel connected to these people. And to your point, with my father not there, that connection wasn't there. But with pictures of 6 generations of these people and their names and their stories, they were there, and I did feel more connected.
So I think what you're touching on is really important, which is that we see people and we decide what they are. And so if you're light-skinned and you're racially ambiguous, then there's a little bit of room to move. But I think that, you know, what I tell my son, who is about the same complexion as you, that it is yours to claim and yours to walk in, and it is yours to create the way that your shoulders rest when you walk, the way that you engage with your peers and your friends. That is yours to bring to that conversation. And so in that way, I think we're very intentional, but also very, you know, it's sort of profound to me that all of these years later, after having grown up in rural white New Hampshire, you know, my son is born and raised in Brooklyn. Born and raised in Brooklyn. He rides the subway every day. He listens to trap music. You know, I mean, it's profound to me, but I did essentially what I needed to have myself. And to that way, to that, he walks very beautifully and very gracefully in his Blackness. He doesn't question it. And I think that, you know, that's a gift to me, not to him, because he's just him. But I think it's about intentionality, and I think it's about immersion, and I think it's about conversations and honesty, and again, very much being very aware of the default and what we have lived in and what we have, how we have defined ourselves against that default for as long as this country has been in existence. And that now, that is really something for me in my life and my writing and my work and my family and my kid, that it will forever be evolving, but to that end. Hey, oh, you have a question, all right.
I can ask the last question of the last program before we close. So, do you feel that the default is shifting? Is the needle moving at all? Do conversations like this make a difference? And what does shift that default?
It doesn't feel like it's moving to me. I think conversations like this make a difference, but I think the people who are interested in conversations like this are probably already, hopefully, making some kind of a difference. I doubt we're changing anyone's minds about anything tonight. Maybe we are. That would be nice.
I think we are.
You think we are?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, that's
Absolutely.
good. But I don't know. I take the pessimistic view, unfortunately, a lot of the time, where I just feel like things are so bad and maybe it's never going to change. And I don't think that's actually true, but I just think it's incredibly slow, and it feels like we're making these micro movements, and for every micro movement, some huge things comes in and goes against it, and you take the optimistic approach.
I do not. I am not an optimist. I'm not an optimist at all. But I do feel like, to bring it back to full circle to what it was the Julian Bond said to me, which is that you find the ease in the fight and in the struggle, and I'm raising a teenager, and this is my life's work. It just is what it is. And so hopeful to me is slightly irrelevant. It is just how, these are the conversations that I have. These are the conversations that my family and my people and the people who read my work and who invite me to do cool things. And, we just have to keep evolving and moving forward. So shifting, yeah. I mean, I hope so. Hope, again. We just have to live in who we are.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nabil.
Thank you.